The worn leather coat hung past Beatrice Wright's knees, its shoulders too broad, its sleeves rolled back 3 times to free her hands. And as she walked down the dusty main street of Hill City, South Dakota in the spring of 1879, she could feel every pair of eyes burning into her back like brands. "Look at her," one woman whispered to another outside the general store, not bothering to lower her voice enough. "Still wearing that dead man's coat like she's forgotten she's a woman." "It's been 8 months," another replied, shaking her head with theatrical disapproval. "You'd think she'd have some dignity by now. My Herald says it's unnatural, a woman clinging to the past like that." Beatrice kept walking, her chin high, her boots striking the wooden boardwalk with purpose. The coat had belonged to Thomas, her husband of 5 years who'd been thrown from a spooked horse last summer and never woken up. The coat smelled like him still, like tobacco and leather and the cedar chest where she'd kept it through the winter. It was too big, yes. It was a man's coat, certainly. But it was warm, and it was his, and it was all she had left of the man who'd promised her a lifetime and delivered only a handful of years. "Miss Beatrice," a child's voice called out, not unkind, just curious. "Why do you always wear that big coat? My mama says it looks funny on you." Beatrice paused, looking down at the freckled face of Tommy Henderson, who couldn't have been more than 7. She managed a small smile. "It keeps me warm, Tommy. That's reason enough." "But it's almost summer," the boy said, genuinely puzzled. "Some cold doesn't come from the weather," she replied softly, then continued on her way. The mercantile loomed ahead, and she steeled herself for more of the same treatment. Clara Simmons, who ran the store with her husband, had never been cruel exactly, but she had that way of looking at Beatrice like she was a curiosity, something to be studied and discussed over tea with the other proper ladies of Hill City. The bell above the door chimed as Beatrice entered, and she was grateful to find the store relatively empty. She needed flour, coffee, and ammunition for the rifle. The small ranch she and Thomas had built together wouldn't run itself, and she'd be damned if she'd give up the land just because she was alone now. "Beatrice," Clara greeted her with a tight smile from behind the counter. "That coat again. You know, I have some lovely wool shawls that just came in. Much more appropriate for a woman of your station." "This coat suits me fine," Beatrice replied evenly, moving toward the dry goods. "It's just that people talk dear, and with you living out there all alone, your reputation is all you have. A woman needs to think about these things." Beatrice turned, meeting Clara's eyes with a steady gaze. "My reputation is that I'm a woman who keeps her word, tends her land, and honors her husband's memory. If that's not enough for the people of this town, then they're welcome to think less of me." The bell chimed again, and a man entered. Beatrice had seen him around town a few times over the past couple of weeks. He was tall, probably in his late 20s, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore dusty trail clothes and had the weathered look of someone who spent more time under open sky than under roof. "Afternoon, Clara," he said, his voice low and pleasant. Then he nodded to Beatrice. "Madam." "Xavier Anderson," Clara said, her voice suddenly warmer. "How are you settling in? Has Mr. Patterson's ranch been treating you well?" "Well enough," Xavier replied. "I'm here for supplies. Need to get back before sundown." Beatrice gathered her items quickly, not wanting to linger longer than necessary. But as she approached the counter with her arms full, her foot caught on an uneven board, and she stumbled. The flour sack burst as it hit the ground, sending up a white cloud that coated her boots and the bottom of Thomas's coat. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Clara sighed, as if this was somehow a personal affront. Beatrice knelt immediately, trying to salvage what she could, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. She'd have to pay for the ruined flour, and she couldn't afford to be careless with her dwindling funds. "Let me help," Xavier said, crouching beside her. His hands were work-roughened as he helped scoop the flour back into what remained of the sack. "I can manage," Beatrice said stiffly. "Didn't say you couldn't," he replied. "But seems to me that two people can clean up a mess faster than one." There was no pity in his voice, no judgment. Just simple fact. Beatrice glanced at him and found him looking at the flour, not at her, not at the coat, just at the task at hand. Together they salvaged what they could, though it was less than half a sack. Beatrice stood, dusting her hands on her skirts under the coat. "I'll pay for the full sack, Clara." "I should think so," Clara sniffed. Xavier pulled a coin from his pocket. "Put it on my account and add the lady's other supplies too." "No," Beatrice said sharply. "Thank you, but no. I pay my own way." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something in those gray eyes that made her breath catch. Not pity, not mockery. Something like recognition, like he understood what it meant to insist on standing on your own feet even when the ground kept shifting beneath you. "Wasn't offering charity," he said quietly. "Was offering kindness. There's a difference." "I don't need either," Beatrice replied, but her voice was softer now. "Maybe not," he agreed, "but I'd still like to offer it. You can pay me back if it sits better with you. I'm working at the Patterson Ranch just west of town." Clara was watching this exchange with avid interest, and that alone made Beatrice want to refuse. But practical sense won out over pride. She did need to conserve her money. The ranch had expenses she could barely meet, and summer was coming with all its demands. "Fine," she said. "I'll bring payment by the ranch tomorrow." "No rush," Xavier said. Outside, the afternoon sun was bright enough to make Beatrice squint. She'd loaded her supplies into the wagon when she heard boots on the boardwalk behind her. "That's quite a coat," Xavier said, and Beatrice's spine stiffened, prepared for the familiar mockery. But when she turned, he wasn't smiling or judging. He was just looking at the coat with what seemed like genuine interest. "It was my husband's," she said, defensive despite herself. "Thought it might be. It's good leather. Well made. The kind of coat a man would want to last. He died 8 months ago. I'm sorry for your loss." The words were simple, but they felt genuine. Most people in Hill City either avoided mentioning Thomas entirely or brought him up with that sickeningly sweet sympathy that made Beatrice want to scream. "People think I should stop wearing it," she said, not quite sure why she was telling this stranger anything. Xavier was quiet for a moment, then said, "People think a lot of things. Doesn't make them right. My father died when I was 17. I wore his hat for 3 years straight. Some folks said it was morbid. I said it reminded me I came from strong stock and I'd better live up to it." Beatrice studied him with new eyes. "Do you still have the hat?" "Wore it out eventually, but by then I didn't need it anymore. I'd figured out who I was without him." He tilted his head slightly. "But that was my time, my process. Anyone who tried to rush me through it got told where to stick their opinions." A surprised laugh bubbled up in Beatrice's throat, the first genuine one she'd made in months. "I imagine they did. I'm heading west," Xavier said, gesturing down the street. "Patterson Ranch is on the way to the right place, if I remember the layout right. You're welcome to follow if you'd like. Roads can be uncertain this time of year." "I've been managing that road alone for 8 months," Beatrice pointed out. "I'm sure you have," he said easily. "Offer stands anyway." There was something about him that was different from the other men in town. He didn't look at her like she was broken or helpless or somehow less than she'd been when Thomas was alive. He looked at her like she was just another person, trying to make her way through difficult circumstances. "All right," she said. "I'd appreciate the company." They rode in comfortable silence for the first mile, The only sounds the creak of wagon wheels and the steady clip of hooves. The land around Hill City was beautiful in its stark way, all rolling prairie and distant hills, with the Black Hills rising in the distance like a promise. "How long have you been in Hill City?" Beatrice finally asked. "About 3 weeks now. Came up from Kansas looking for work. Patterson needed hands for the spring roundup and the job suited me. Kansas is a long way to travel." "I've traveled further," Xavier said. "Been moving around since I was 18. Worked ranches from Texas to Montana. Figured it was time to see South Dakota. And you just keep moving." "Never settle anywhere." He was quiet for a moment. "Never found a place that felt like it needed me to stay. Or maybe I never needed a place badly enough to put down roots. Seemed easier to keep moving than to risk putting down roots somewhere that might not hold." Beatrice understood that more than she wanted to admit. After Thomas died, she'd thought about selling the ranch, moving somewhere no one knew her, starting fresh. But the land held her here as surely as if she was rooted in it. This was where she'd been happy. Leaving felt like abandoning that happiness, declaring it hadn't been real or lasting enough to matter. "The coat," Xavier said suddenly. "It's more than just memory, isn't it? It's armor." Beatrice's hands tightened on the reins. "What do you mean? You wear it when you come to town?" "I'd wager you don't wear it as much at the ranch when you're alone. But in town, with all those people watching and judging, it's like putting on armor. Reminds you that you're strong enough to handle whatever they throw at you." She wanted to deny it, but the words stuck in her throat because he was right. At home, she often left the coat hanging by the door, but whenever she had to face the town, face the pitying looks and whispered comments, she put it on like a shield. "Is that wrong?" she asked quietly. "Wrong? No. Necessary, maybe. But also maybe a sign that the people around you aren't seeing what they should be seeing." "And what should they be seeing?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Beatrice felt something shift in her chest. "They should be seeing a woman strong enough to run a ranch alone, strong enough to honor her past while still living in her present, strong enough to wear whatever damn coat she chooses and not apologize for it." Warmth flooded through her, unexpected and unsettling. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," Xavier said. "I know you didn't break when your husband died. You bent, probably, but you didn't break. That takes a special kind of strength." They'd reached the turn off to Patterson's ranch. Xavier pulled his horse to a stop and turned in the saddle. "You going to be all right from here?" "I've been making this ride for 8 months," Beatrice said, "but there was no heat in it." "That you have," he agreed. "But that doesn't mean you have to keep doing everything alone forever." He tipped his hat to her and turned his horse toward the ranch. Beatrice watched him go, feeling oddly bereft. For the first time since Thomas died, someone had looked at her and seen her, not her grief, not her widowhood, not her unconventional choices. Just her. The next morning, Beatrice woke with purpose. She had work to do on the ranch, fences to mend and animals to tend, but first she wanted to settle her debt. She counted out the coins Xavier had spent on her supplies, adding a little extra for his kindness, and tucked them into her pocket. The ride to Patterson's ranch took her past fields greening with spring growth and cattle dotting the landscape like brown and white clouds. The ranch house was substantial, a 2-story structure with a wide porch and outbuildings spreading out behind it. Several cowboys were working near the corrals, and Beatrice spotted Xavier among them. He was breaking a young horse, patient and firm as the animal pranced and tested him. He moved with an easy confidence, never using more force than necessary, reading the horse's movements like he was reading words on a page. It was impressive to watch, and Beatrice found herself lingering longer than she'd intended. One of the other ranch hands noticed her first. "Hey now, looks like Anderson's got himself an admirer." Xavier looked up, and even from a distance, Beatrice could see the flicker of annoyance that crossed his face at the comment. He handed the horse's lead to another cowboy and walked toward her, wiping his hands on his pants. "Miss Wright," he said formally, clearly for the benefit of the watching men. "What brings you out this way?" She pulled the coins from her pocket. "My debt from yesterday, as promised." He looked at the money in her palm, then back at her face. "You didn't have to rush out here." "I pay my debts promptly," she said. "That's the widow Wright," one of the cowboys called out. "The one who wears her dead husband's coat everywhere. Don't see it on you today, madam." Several of the men laughed, and Beatrice felt her cheeks burn. She was wearing a simple riding dress today, practical for ranch work but nothing remarkable. She'd left the coat at home precisely because she was staying on her own land, but now she felt exposed without it. "That's enough," Xavier said sharply, his voice cutting through the laughter like a knife. "Show some respect." "Aw, we're just having fun," another cowboy said. "Everyone in town talks about it. Woman walking around in a man's coat like she's trying to be him or something." "She's not trying to be anyone but herself," Xavier said, and there was an edge to his voice now that made the cowboys shift uncomfortably. "Which is more than I can say for men who hide behind group mockery because they're too cowardly to face their own grief or loss with half as much dignity." The silence that followed was heavy. Beatrice stood frozen, not sure whether to be grateful or embarrassed that Xavier was defending her. She'd learned to let the mockery roll off her back, to pretend it didn't cut, but having someone stand up for her was something else entirely. "I should go," she said quietly, pressing the coins into Xavier's hand. "Thank you again for your help yesterday." She turned to leave, but Xavier's voice stopped her. "Wait." She paused, looking back. "Would you like to walk a bit?" he asked. "There's a nice path down by the creek. Unless you need to get back to your ranch right away." Part of her wanted to refuse, to maintain the walls she'd built so carefully around herself. But another part, a part she thought had died with Thomas, wanted to say yes. Wanted to spend more time with this man who saw her as something other than the tragic widow or the woman in the too big coat. "All right," she said. They walked in silence for a while, following a worn path that led away from the ranch buildings toward a line of cottonwood trees marking the creek. The morning was beautiful, the air fresh with the smell of grass and water and growing things. "I'm sorry about them," Xavier said finally. "Some men don't know how to act around strength when they see it, especially in a woman, so they mock it instead." "You keep saying I'm strong," Beatrice said. "But I don't feel strong. Most days I feel like I'm barely holding on." "That's what strength looks like, though. It's not about never struggling. It's about getting up every morning even when you don't want to. It's about tending your land and paying your debts and refusing to let the world tell you who you should be." They'd reached the creek, and Beatrice sat on a fallen log, looking out at the water. Xavier sat beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "Thomas and I were going to build something together," she said, surprised at herself for speaking. "We had plans. We were going to expand the herd, maybe build a bigger house, have children. And then one moment, one spooked horse, and all of it was just gone." "But you kept the ranch," Xavier said. "I didn't know what else to do. Selling it felt like admitting that none of it mattered, that our plans and our dreams were worthless just because he wasn't here to see them through." "They weren't worthless," Xavier said firmly, "and neither are you. You're living the life you and he started to build. That's not weakness. That's faith. Faith that what you had was real and worth preserving." Beatrice felt tears prick at her eyes, and she blinked them back angrily. She'd cried so much in the first months after Thomas died that she'd thought she had no tears left. But Xavier's words touched something deep inside her, some wound she'd been pretending had healed when it had only scarred over. "Why do you care?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." Xavier was quiet for a long moment. "My mother died when I was 15, he said finally. "Fever took her in 3 days. My father was never the same after. He tried to be strong for me and my sister, but you could see it eating him up inside. He died 2 years later. Doctors said it was his heart, but I always thought it was really just broken beyond repair." "I'm sorry," Beatrice said. "The thing is, I watched him try to hide his grief, try to pretend he was fine when he wasn't, and it didn't help him. It just made him hollow. You, though, you wear your grief openly. You don't hide it or apologize for it. You wear that coat and you honor your husband's memory, and you still manage to keep moving forward. That's brave. That's real. And it's something I wish my father had been able to do." Beatrice turned to look at him fully. In the dappled sunlight under the cottonwoods, he looked younger, more vulnerable. She could see the shadows of his own losses in his eyes, the weight of his own griefs. "Is that why you keep moving?" she asked gently. "Because staying in one place makes the loss feel more real, maybe," he admitted. "But also because I haven't found a reason to stay anywhere. Haven't found anything that felt worth putting down roots for." The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken possibility. Beatrice felt her heart beating faster, felt something she hadn't felt since Thomas died stirring to life in her chest. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the possibility of love. The recognition that maybe, someday, she could feel that way again about someone. "I should get back," she said, standing abruptly. It was too much, too fast, too confusing. Xavier stood too, nodding. "Of course. Thank you for bringing the payment, though I meant what I said about there being no rush." "I know," Beatrice said, "but it matters to me to keep my word." "I can see that," he said. "It's one of the things I admire about you." The ride back to her ranch felt longer than usual, Beatrice's mind spinning with thoughts of Xavier. It was too soon, she told herself. Thomas had only been gone 8 months. What would people say if they knew she was even thinking about another man? The town already talked about her enough. But then again, what did it matter what they said? They talked about the coat, about her living alone, about everything she did. She'd never be able to please them all, so why should she try? Over the next few weeks, Beatrice found reasons to go into town more often than necessary. And more often than not, she'd see Xavier there, running errands for the Patterson ranch. They'd exchange greetings, sometimes walk together a short way, talking about small things. He told her about the places he'd been, the ranches he'd worked. She told him about her and Thomas's plans for the ranch, found herself sharing memories without the sharp pain that usually accompanied them. One afternoon, she was in the mercantile again when trouble walked through the door in the form of Cyrus Monroe, a rancher from the north side of Hill City who'd been trying to buy her land since Thomas died. He was a big man, running to fat in middle age, with the kind of confidence that came from always having money and rarely hearing the word no. "Beatrice," he said, not bothering with the courtesy of her proper name or title. "I need to talk to you about that offer I made. I told you 3 months ago, Mr. Monroe, the ranch isn't for sale. Now, be reasonable," he said, moving closer. She could smell whiskey on his breath, though it was only mid-afternoon. "A woman alone can't manage a ranch that size. It's not natural. You should sell while you can still get a decent price. I'm willing to be generous." "The ranch is not for sale," Beatrice repeated, her voice firm despite the nervousness fluttering in her stomach. Monroe had a reputation for getting what he wanted, one way or another. "You're being stubborn and foolish," Monroe said, his voice hardening. "That land should be in the hands of someone who can properly work it, not a woman playing at being a rancher because she can't let go of her dead husband." The words stung, precisely because they echoed Beatrice's own worst fears. What if she was being foolish? What if she couldn't make it work? I think the lady's made herself clear. Xavier's voice cut in. He'd entered the store so quietly that neither Beatrice nor Monroe had noticed him. Ranch isn't for sale. Time for you to accept that and move on. Monroe turned, his face reddening. This doesn't concern you, Drifter. This is between me and the lady. The lady has made her position clear, Xavier said calmly. So there's nothing between you, and I'm not a drifter. I work for Patterson, and he'd be right interested to hear about one of his neighbors harassing widows in town. Harassing? Monroe sputtered. I'm making a legitimate business offer. After being told no multiple times, pretty sure that crosses into harassment. Xavier moved to stand beside Beatrice, not touching her, but his presence a solid support at her side. Now, I believe Miss Wright has shopping to do and you've got a ranch to get back to. For a moment, Beatrice thought Monroe might push the issue. His face was mottled with anger, and his hands had curled into fists. But several other townspeople had gathered, drawn by the raised voices, and Monroe seemed to realize he was on the wrong side of public opinion. This isn't over, he said to Beatrice. That land should be mine, and one way or another I'll have it. He stormed out, leaving an uncomfortable silence in his wake. Clara Simmons, who'd been watching from behind the counter with wide eyes, finally spoke. My goodness, the nerve of that man. He's been after the right land since Thomas passed, one of the other women said. Poor dear, it must be so difficult fending off men like that all alone. Xavier glanced at Beatrice, and she could see the question in his eyes. Are you all right? She gave him a small nod. Thank you, she said quietly, though I was managing. I know you were, Xavier replied, but sometimes it's easier to manage together. That evening, Beatrice sat on her porch watching the sunset and thinking about Xavier's words, together. It was a word she'd stopped associating with her own life. She was alone now, and she'd thought she'd have to stay that way, that moving forward meant moving forward by herself. But what if it didn't have to be that way? The question terrified her because it meant opening herself up to the possibility of loss again. She'd loved Thomas with everything she had, and losing him had nearly destroyed her. Could she really risk feeling that way about someone else? The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention. A rider was approaching in the gathering dusk, and as he drew closer she recognized Xavier. Her heart leaped, then sank. Why was he here? Had something happened? Evening, he called as he dismounted. Hope I'm not intruding. Is everything all right? Beatrice asked, standing. Everything's fine. I just wanted to check on you after what happened with Monroe today. That was a heavy situation. I've handled worse, Beatrice said, then softened. But thank you for checking. Would you like some coffee? I've got a pot on. I'd like that very much. She poured them both cups, and they sat on the porch steps, looking out at the darkening prairie. The first stars were beginning to appear, and the air was cooling, bringing that particular freshness that came with spring evenings. This is beautiful land, Xavier said. I can see why you and your husband wanted to build a life here. It is, Beatrice agreed. Some days it feels too big, too empty. Other days it's the only thing keeping me grounded. Monroe's going to be a problem, Xavier said. Men like him don't give up easy when they want something. I know, Beatrice said quietly. He's been circling like a vulture since Thomas died. I think he believes if he just wears me down enough, I'll sell just to be rid of him. Will you? No, Beatrice said firmly. This land is mine. Thomas and I bought it together, worked it together, dreamed on it together. I'm not giving it up because some bully with money thinks a woman can't run a ranch. Can you? Xavier asked. The question wasn't challenging, just curious. Run it, I mean. Not questioning whether you should, but whether you have the resources. Ranching is hard work, even with a full crew. Beatrice was quiet for a moment. Honestly, I'm barely managing. I've had to let most of the hands go because I can't afford to keep them on. I do what I can by myself, but there's always more work than hours in the day. If I have a bad season, if something goes wrong, I could lose everything. Have you thought about taking on a partner? Not selling, but bringing someone in who could help with the work and the costs. Who'd want to partner with a widow running a failing ranch? Beatrice said with a bitter laugh. The men in town either want to buy me out cheap or marry me to get the land. No one's interested in actually helping me keep what's mine. Xavier was quiet for a long moment. I would. Beatrice turned to stare at him. What? I'd be interested in partnering with you, not to take the ranch from you, but to help you build it into what you and Thomas dreamed about. I've got some money saved, not a fortune, but enough to help, and I know ranching inside and out. We could make this place work, Beatrice, really work. You barely know me, Beatrice said, her heart pounding. Why would you offer something like that? Because I see what you're trying to do, and I think it's worth doing. Because I've been drifting for 10 years, looking for something worth staying for, and I think maybe I've found it. Because when I'm around you, I feel like I could finally stop running from my own past and actually build a future. The words hung in the air between them, full of possibility and risk. Beatrice's hands trembled around her coffee cup. People will talk, she said. A widow and a single man running a ranch together, they'll assume things. They already talk, Xavier pointed out. At least this way, you'd have help keeping the ranch running. And if we're worried about propriety, Patterson and his wife could act as references. Or we could draw up legal papers making it a pure business arrangement. Is that what you want? Beatrice asked, looking at him directly. A pure business arrangement. Xavier held her gaze, and in his eyes, she saw the same confused tangle of emotions she was feeling. I want to be honest with you. I think you're remarkable. I think you're strong and brave and more alive than anyone I've met in years, even wearing your grief like that coat. And I'd be lying if I said I hadn't thought about what it might be like if this was more than just a business arrangement. But I also know you're still mourning your husband, and I'd never push you towards something you're not ready for. So we start with business, and if something more develops naturally, we'll figure it out then. Beatrice felt tears threatening again. His honesty was disarming, made her want to be equally honest. I loved Thomas, she said. I loved him with everything I had, and when he died, I thought that part of me died too, the part that could feel that way about someone. But, Xavier prompted gently. But lately, being around you, I've felt that part stirring back to life. And it terrifies me because I don't know if I can survive losing someone I love again. I can't promise I won't die, Xavier said. None of us can promise that, but I can promise that I won't leave you intentionally. I can promise that if you let me into your life, I'll honor that trust and work every day to be worthy of it. Beatrice set down her coffee cup and stood, walking to the edge of the porch. Xavier followed, standing a few feet away, giving her space but remaining present. If we do this, she said slowly, we do it right. Legal partnership papers, everything clear and above board. We work the ranch together, split the costs and profits fairly, and we see where things go from there. Agreed, Xavier said. And I'm keeping the coat, Beatrice added with a touch of defiance. Xavier smiled, a real smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. I wouldn't expect anything less. They shook hands on it, and Beatrice felt something shift in her world. It wasn't quite hope yet, but it was close. It was possibility. The next week was a whirlwind of activity. Xavier gave notice at Patterson's ranch, though he stayed on to help finish the spring roundup. He and Beatrice met with the town's lawyer, Jacob Sterling, to draw up partnership papers. Sterling's eyebrows had risen nearly to his hairline when they explained what they wanted, but he drafted the documents professionally enough. You understand this is highly unusual, Sterling said as they reviewed the papers. A widow and an unmarried man in business together will cause talk. Let them talk, Beatrice said firmly. They talk anyway. At least now I'll have help keeping my ranch running. The papers were signed and witnessed, and just like that, Xavier Anderson became equal partner in the Wright ranch. He moved his few belongings into the small bunkhouse Thomas had built for ranch hands, insisting on maintaining propriety despite the partnership. Working together transformed the ranch. Xavier's experience and Beatrice's determination made for a powerful combination. They repaired fences, worked with the cattle, and planned for the coming season. Xavier was good at the work, but more than that, he was good at reading when Beatrice needed help, and when she needed to prove to herself that she could do something alone. "You've got a good eye for cattle," he said one afternoon as they were checking the herd. "Better than a lot of ranchers I've worked for." "Thomas taught me," Beatrice said. "He never treated me like I was too delicate to learn the real work of ranching. We were partners in every sense." "He sounds like he was a good man." "He was," Beatrice said. Then, carefully, "But he's gone, and I'm still here. It's taken me a long time to understand that those two things can both be true, that I can honor his memory and still live my own life." Xavier looked at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "I'm glad you're still here," he said quietly. "So am I," Beatrice replied. The town's reaction to the partnership was about what they'd expected. Some people were scandalized, whispering that it was improper and probably something more than just business. Others thought Beatrice had finally come to her senses and found a man to take care of her. Very few seemed to understand that what she'd actually done was find an equal partner who respected her capability and autonomy. Clara Simmons cornered Beatrice in the mercantile one day, her expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. "I heard you've taken on a partner." "That Xavier Anderson who helped you before." "That's right," Beatrice said, not bothering to elaborate. "People are saying all sorts of things, dear, about what kind of arrangement you two really have." "People can say what they like," Beatrice replied calmly. "The truth is documented in legal papers at Sterling's office. We're business partners, working the ranch together." "But a single man and a widow living on the same property," Clara pressed. "It just doesn't look right." "What doesn't look right is everyone in this town thinking they have a say in how I live my life," Beatrice said, her patience finally wearing thin. "I've been respectful, I've been proper, I've done everything expected of a widow, but I'm also running a ranch and that requires help. Xavier is a skilled rancher and a good man. Beyond that, it's none of anyone's business." She gathered her supplies and left before Clara could respond, her heart pounding with righteous anger. Outside, she found Xavier loading feed into their wagon. He took one look at her face and said, "Rough conversation, Clara and her concerned propriety," Beatrice said. "I'm tired of everyone thinking my life is their business to comment on." "Want to give them something real to talk about?" Xavier asked, a mischievous glint in his eye. "What do you mean, we could get married?" Beatrice froze, staring at him. "What?" Xavier raised his hands quickly. "Hear me out. I don't mean a real marriage, not yet, but a marriage in name would solve all the propriety issues. We could still maintain separate living spaces, still take things slow between us, but it would stop all the gossip and give you the protection of being a married woman again." "That's insane," Beatrice said. "Maybe," Xavier agreed. "But is it any more insane than letting people like Clara and Monroe dictate how we live our lives? Is it more insane than pretending we don't feel something growing between us just because it hasn't been a full year since Thomas died?" Beatrice's head was spinning. "You said we'd take things slow. See where they went naturally. And we have been, Xavier said. But Beatrice, I wake up every morning excited to start the day because I know I'll be working alongside you. I go to bed every night thinking about you in that house, so close but still separate, and wishing things were different. I'm not saying we have to consummate a marriage right away or even share a bed. But I am saying that I care about you, more than I've cared about anyone in a very long time, and I'd be honored to call you my wife, even if we take years to grow into what that really means. Beatrice felt tears streaming down her cheeks, and she didn't know if they were tears of fear or joy or confusion. I still love Thomas, she whispered. I know, Xavier said gently, and I'm not asking you to stop. I'm just asking you to make room for me too. Not to replace him, but to stand beside his memory as we build something new together. The coat, Beatrice said. I can't promise I'll stop wearing it. I'm not asking you to, Xavier said. He stepped closer carefully, giving her time to move away if she wanted. When she didn't, he reached out and touched the sleeve of the coat she was wearing. This coat is part of your story. It's part of what made you who you are. I wouldn't want you to give that up. Beatrice looked up at him, at this man who'd appeared in her life and seen her, really seen her in a way no one else had since Thomas died, who defended her, partnered with her, respected her strength while acknowledging her grief. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. The wedding was small, held in the church in Hill City with only a handful of witnesses. Beatrice wore a simple blue dress and over it, Thomas's coat. Some of the townspeople whispered at that, but she didn't care. Xavier had been right. The coat was part of her story, and she wasn't going to hide it just to make others comfortable. Xavier wore his best clothes, his dark hair finely trimmed. And when he looked at her as she walked down the aisle, there was such genuine feeling in his eyes that Beatrice felt her heart stutter. This was real. This was happening. She was marrying another man, starting another chapter of her life. Pastor Williams performed the ceremony, his voice warm and sincere. When it came time for the vows, Xavier took her hands in his and spoke clearly. I promise to honor you and stand beside you. To work with you, not just for you. To respect your past while building our future together. And to never, ever ask you to be anything other than exactly who you are. Beatrice's voice shook slightly as she made her own vows. I promise to open my heart to this new beginning while honoring what came before. To trust you even when trust is hard. To build a life with you that's honest and true. And to show up every day as my full self. They exchanged simple gold bands, and when Pastor Williams pronounced them married, Xavier leaned in and kissed her gently. It was a chaste kiss, appropriate for a church full of watching eyes, but Beatrice felt it down to her toes. It had been so long since she'd been kissed, so long since she'd let herself feel desire for another person. The reception was held at the Patterson Ranch, a concession to the need for a proper celebration that Beatrice had initially resisted. But Patterson and his wife Martha had insisted, and it turned out to be a lovely affair. There was food and music, and people actually seemed happy for them, or at least willing to accept the marriage as making their partnership respectable. Cyrus Monroe showed up, uninvited, halfway through the celebration. He was obviously drunk, swaying on his feet as he approached Beatrice and Xavier. "Congratulations," he slurred. "Though I suppose you think you're real clever, don't you? Getting yourself a husband so you don't have to sell that ranch." "Mr. Monroe," Xavier said evenly, "you're drunk and you're making a scene. I suggest you head home before you embarrass yourself further." "Embarrass myself?" Monroe laughed harshly. "That land should be mine. Everyone knows I made her fair offers. But no, she'd rather play rancher with some drifter than sell to a legitimate businessman." "The lady is my wife now," Xavier said, his voice low and dangerous. And you're going to show her respect, or you and I are going to have a different kind of conversation." Several of the other ranchers, including Patterson, had moved closer, clearly ready to intervene if necessary. Monroe looked around at the hostile faces and seemed to realize he was outnumbered. "This isn't over," he said, pointing a wavering finger at Beatrice. "That land will be mine." "Get him out of here," Patterson said to a couple of his hands, and Monroe was escorted, protesting, off the property. "I'm sorry about that," Martha Patterson said, moving to Beatrice's side. "Some men just can't accept a woman making her own choices." "It's not your fault," Beatrice said, "though I'm starting to think Monroe is going to be a bigger problem than just a nuisance." "He's all bluster," Patterson said, but his eyes were concerned. "Still, might be worth keeping an eye on your property. Men like that sometimes do foolish things when they feel thwarted." That night, Xavier carried Beatrice's belongings from her bedroom to the guest room and moved his own things into the bunkhouse. "We'll take this at whatever pace you need," he said. "There's no rush." But Beatrice found herself standing in the hallway between the two rooms, feeling the separation keenly. They were married now, but sleeping in different buildings. It felt strange, incomplete somehow. "Xavier," she called out before he could leave. He turned, silhouetted in the doorway. "Yes, stay in the house tonight. Not in my bed, but in the house, please." His expression softened. "Of course." That night, Beatrice lay in bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of someone else in the house. Xavier's footsteps as he got ready for bed in the guest room. The creak of the bed frame as he settled in. It was strange but not unwelcome. The house had been too quiet for too long. The next few weeks fell into a new rhythm. They worked the ranch together during the day, and in the evenings they'd share dinner and talk. Sometimes about the ranch, sometimes about their pasts, sometimes about their hopes for the future. Slowly, carefully, they were building something between them. One night, Beatrice found herself telling Xavier about the day Thomas died. She'd never talked about it in detail to anyone, but somehow, with Xavier, the words came. "It was such an ordinary day," she said. "That's what I keep coming back to. There was no warning, no sense that anything was wrong. He went out to check the fence line like he'd done 100 times before. The horse got spooked by a snake, threw him. He hit his head on a rock. That's all it took. One moment, one accident, and everything changed." "You were here alone when it happened?" Xavier asked gently. "I found him an hour later when he didn't come back for lunch. He was unconscious, barely breathing. I got him back to the house, sent for the doctor. He never woke up. 3 days later, he was gone." Xavier reached across the table and took her hand. "I'm so sorry, Beatrice. That must have been unbearable." "The worst part was how fast it was," Beatrice said. "I didn't get to say goodbye, didn't get to tell him all the things I still wanted to say. One day we were making plans for the future, and the next, there was no future. Not the one we'd imagined anyway." "Is that why the coat matters so much?" Xavier asked. "Because it's tangible proof that he was real, that what you had was real," Beatrice nodded. "When I wear it, I can still catch his scent sometimes. Can remember what it felt like when he'd hug me wearing it. It's like carrying a piece of him with me." "You don't have to explain it to me," Xavier said, "or to anyone else. But I want to explain it to you," Beatrice said. "I want you to understand, because you're part of my life now, and I need you to know that loving you doesn't mean I stopped loving him. My heart isn't divided. It's just bigger than I thought it could be." Xavier's eyes were bright with emotion. "You love me." Beatrice was surprised by her own words, but realized they were true. Somewhere along the way, her feelings for Xavier had deepened from friendship and gratitude into something more. "Yes," she said, "I do. It's different from how I loved Thomas. But it's real and it's strong and it's yours if you want it." Xavier stood, drawing her up from her chair and into his arms. "I want it," he said. God, Beatrice, I want it more than I've wanted anything in years. I love you. I've been falling in love with you since that first day in the mercantile when you refused my charity and insisted on paying your own way. He kissed her then, not the chaste kiss from their wedding, but something deeper, more passionate. Beatrice melted into it, her arms coming up around his neck, her body pressing against his. It felt right. It felt like coming home to a place she'd thought she'd lost forever. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. I don't want to sleep in the guest room anymore, he said. Unless you need me to. I don't need you to, Beatrice whispered. I need you with me. They made love that night slowly and tenderly, learning each other's bodies with patience and care. It was different from how it had been with Thomas, but that didn't make it less beautiful. Xavier was attentive and gentle, constantly checking that she was all right, that she wanted this. And Beatrice found herself responding with a hunger she'd thought had died with her first husband. Afterward, lying tangled together in the bed she'd once shared with Thomas, Beatrice felt a moment of guilt. Was it wrong to feel this happy with someone else? Was she betraying Thomas's memory? What are you thinking? Xavier asked, his hand stroking her hair. That I'm happy, Beatrice said. And feeling guilty about being happy. Xavier propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her. Thomas loved you, right? Yes. Then wouldn't he want you to be happy? Wouldn't he want you to live a full life even after he was gone? Beatrice thought about it. Thomas had been generous and loving, never possessive or controlling. When they'd talked about the future, he'd made her promise that if anything happened to him, she wouldn't just give up on life. She'd forgotten that promise in her grief, but now it came back to her clearly. He made me promise once, she said slowly, that if anything happened to him, I'd keep living. Really living, not just existing. Then honor that promise, Xavier said. Love me without guilt. Build a life with me that's full and happy and everything you deserve. What about you? Beatrice asked. Don't you deserve to be with someone who can give you all of herself, not just the parts that aren't still tied to a dead man? You are giving me all of yourself, Xavier said firmly. Your past is part of who you are. Your love for Thomas shaped you, made you the strong, loyal, loving woman I fell in love with. I don't want you to cut away pieces of yourself to be with me. I want all of you, including the parts that will always belong to your first husband. Beatrice felt tears sliding down her temples. How did I get so lucky twice? She whispered. I ask myself the same question, Xavier said, kissing her softly. Now sleep. Tomorrow we've got a ranch to run. The next few months were the happiest Beatrice had been since Thomas died. The ranch flourished under their joint management. With Xavier's expertise and connections, they were able to expand the herd and improve their operations. The house became a home again, full of life and laughter and love. But Cyrus Monroe hadn't forgotten his desire for their land. In early autumn, they started noticing problems. Fence lines cut. Cattle going missing. Small fires starting in their fields that they managed to put out before they spread. It's Monroe, Xavier said after the third incident. Has to be. He's trying to make things difficult enough that we'll give up and sell. We can't prove it's him, Beatrice pointed out. And even if we could, he's got enough money to make any legal action difficult. Then we need to catch him in the act, Xavier said. I'll start keeping watch at night. We'll take turns, Beatrice corrected. I'm not letting you shoulder all of this alone. They set up a rotation, one of them staying awake each night to watch for trouble. It was exhausting but necessary. On the fourth night of their vigil, Beatrice spotted movement near the barn. 3 men, too far away to identify clearly in the darkness, but definitely up to no good. She woke Xavier quickly, and together they crept out to confront the intruders. As they got closer, Beatrice recognized one of the men as working for Monroe. They were carrying kerosene, clearly intending to set fire to the barn. "I suggest you put that down," Xavier called out, his rifle raised. "And get off our property." The men froze. One of them, bolder or more foolish than the others, sneered. "Or what? You going to shoot us? That'd be murder." "It'd be defending my property," Xavier said coldly, "and I'd be well within my rights. Now drop the kerosene and get moving." "Monroe's going to get this land one way or another," the man said. "You might as well sell now before things get worse." "Monroe's going to jail if he keeps this up," Beatrice said sharply. "We know he sent you, and we're going to make sure the law knows it too." The men looked at each other uncertainly. Finally, the leader dropped the kerosene can and put his hands up. "We're just doing a job, madam. Monroe pays good money." "Not good enough to hang for arson," Xavier said. "Now get out of here. And tell Monroe that the next time he sends someone after us, we won't be so merciful." The men fled into the darkness, and Beatrice and Xavier stood together, catching their breath. "That was close," Beatrice said. "Too close," Xavier agreed. "We need to end this with Monroe once and for all." The next morning, they rode into town and went straight to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Tom Hawkins was a fair man, if not always the most energetic in his duties. But when they explained what had happened and who was behind it, his expression grew serious. "Those are serious accusations," Hawkins said. "You have proof?" "We have 3 men who we caught on our property with kerosene in the middle of the night," Xavier said. "And a pattern of incidents ever since Monroe made his interest in our land clear." "I'll talk to Monroe," Hawkins said. "But without witnesses willing to testify against him, there's not much I can do." "Then maybe it's time to have a more direct conversation," Xavier said. They found Monroe at the saloon, drinking whiskey and playing cards with several other ranchers. He looked up as they approached, a smirk crossing his face. "Well, if it isn't the happy couple," he said. "Come to finally accept my offer. Come to tell you that if you send anyone else after our ranch, you'll regret it," Xavier said flatly. The saloon had gone quiet, everyone watching the confrontation. Monroe stood, swaying slightly. "You threatening me, boy?" "I'm promising you," Xavier said. "We've built a good relationship with the other ranchers around here. They don't take kindly to one of their neighbors being harassed. You keep this up, and you'll find yourself shut out of every business deal in the territory." "He's right," Patterson spoke up from across the room. "We've heard about what you've been doing, Cyrus. It's not right, and it's not how we do business here." Other ranchers nodded in agreement. Monroe looked around, realizing he'd lost the room. "That land should be mine," he said, but the bluster was gone from his voice. "It's good land, and it's wasted on a woman and a drifter." "That land belongs to my wife and me," Xavier said, "and it's going to stay that way. You need to accept that and move on." Monroe stared at them for a long moment, then seemed to deflate. "Fine," he said. "Keep your damn ranch. I'm done wasting my time on it." It wasn't a gracious concession, but it was enough. As they left the saloon, Beatrice felt a weight lift from her shoulders. They'd stood up to Monroe, and with the community's support, they'd won. That winter was harsh, testing their resolve and their partnership. But they weathered it together, keeping the ranch running through freezing temperatures and heavy snows. On the coldest nights, they'd huddle together in front of the fire, sharing stories and dreams, building the foundation of a life together. One night in late January, Beatrice realized her monthly courses were late. She waited another week to be sure, then told Xavier. "I think I'm pregnant," she said, her hands shaking slightly. Xavier's face lit up with joy. "Are you sure?" "Pretty sure. I'll know more in a few weeks, but all the signs are there." He swept her into his arms, spinning her around. "A baby," he said. "We're going to have a baby." Beatrice laughed, caught up in his excitement, but part of her was terrified. She'd never been pregnant before. She and Thomas had tried, but it had never happened. And now, with Xavier, it was happening. It felt like another step away from her old life, another change she wasn't sure she was ready for. As if reading her thoughts, Xavier set her down gently and cupped her face in his hands. "It's okay to be scared," he said. "It's okay to have mixed feelings. This doesn't erase your past, it's just building on your future." "Our future," Beatrice corrected. "Our future," Xavier agreed. The pregnancy was confirmed by the doctor a few weeks later, and suddenly the future felt very real and very immediate. They started preparing the spare bedroom as a nursery, painting the walls and building a cradle. Beatrice found herself talking to her growing belly, telling the baby about the ranch, about their plans, about the life they were building. One afternoon, as she was folding tiny clothes, she picked up Thomas's coat from where she'd hung it on the chair. She hadn't worn it in months, she realized. Not since the wedding, actually. She held it to her face, breathing in the scent that was almost gone now, more memory than reality. "I'll always love you," she whispered to the coat, to Thomas's memory. "But I'm building something new now, something good. I hope you'd be proud of me." Xavier found her there, tears streaming down her face, the coat clutched in her hands. "Hey," he said softly, kneeling beside her. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," Beatrice said. "I just realized I haven't worn the coat in months and I didn't even notice. I've been so happy, so focused on our future that I stopped needing it as much." "You want to wear it again?" Xavier asked. "Because that's okay too." "I think I'll keep it," Beatrice said, "but maybe not wear it anymore. It served its purpose. It helped me feel strong when I needed that reminder. But I don't need it the same way now. Now I have you and our baby, and a future I'm excited about." She folded the coat carefully and placed it in the chest at the foot of the bed, the same chest where she'd kept it after Thomas died. It felt right, honoring it but also putting it to rest. The baby, a boy they named William after Xavier's father, was born in early September of 1880. The birth was long and difficult, and there were moments when Beatrice was sure she wouldn't survive it. But Xavier stayed by her side the whole time, holding her hand, encouraging her, refusing to leave even when the doctor suggested he might want to wait outside. When the baby finally arrived, red-faced and squalling, Beatrice felt a love so fierce and immediate it took her breath away. Xavier held his son with tears streaming down his face, looking at Beatrice with such wonder and gratitude that she fell in love with him all over again. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for this, for him, for everything." "Thank you," Beatrice replied, "for seeing me when no one else did. For loving me even with all my complicated history. For building this life with me." The years that followed were full and rich. William grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved the ranch and everything about it. 2 years after William, they had a daughter, Emma, who had Xavier's gray eyes and Beatrice's determination. And 3 years after that, another son, Thomas, named for the man whose memory Beatrice would always carry with her. The ranch prospered. With hard work and Xavier's business sense, they expanded their holdings and became one of the most successful operations in the area. They hired a full crew of ranch hands, treating them fairly and earning their loyalty. The Wright Anderson Ranch, as it came to be known, was a fixture of Hill City, respected and admired. Cyrus Monroe eventually sold his ranch and moved east, defeated by the community's rejection of his tactics and his own failing health. Beatrice felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only relief that the threat was finally gone. Clara Simmons, who'd once whispered about Beatrice wearing her dead husband's coat, became something close to a friend. One day, years after the wedding, she brought it up directly. "I owe you an apology," Clara said as they worked together at a church fundraiser. "I judged you harshly back then. Thought you were being dramatic, making a spectacle of your grief. But I understand now that you were just surviving the only way you knew how." "Thank you for saying that," Beatrice replied. "It means more than you know." "You've built a beautiful life," Clara said, watching as Xavier played with their children outside the church. "And you did it by being true to yourself. That takes real courage." On Beatrice's 40th birthday, Xavier gave her a gift wrapped in brown paper. When she opened it, she found a new coat. It was beautiful, made of soft leather, sized perfectly for her. But what made her tears fall was what Xavier had done. He'd taken pieces of Thomas's old coat and incorporated them into the new one. The collar, made from the original coat's shoulder. The cuffs, crafted from the sleeves she'd rolled back so many times. The coat was new, but it carried the old within it. "I thought you might like something that was yours," Xavier explained. "But that still honored where you came from. You don't have to wear it if you don't want to." Beatrice slipped the coat on. It fit perfectly, settling on her shoulders like it had been made specifically for her. Which, of course, it had been. "It's perfect," she said. "It's absolutely perfect." She wore that coat for years, through cattle drives and town meetings, through celebrations and difficulties. It became her trademark, the widow-turned-rancher's wife who'd built a life from grief and determination and love. And while she no longer needed it as armor, she wore it as a reminder of how far she'd come. When William turned 18, he took over much of the ranch's daily operations, showing the same natural skill with cattle and land management that his parents had. Emma, 15 and fierce, declared her intention to study law, determined to help women like her mother who faced prejudice and obstacles. Young Thomas, just entering his teenage years, had his father's calm temperament and his mother's stubborn streak, a combination that would serve him well. One evening, sitting on the porch watching the sunset with Xavier, Beatrice reflected on the life they'd built. "You ever regret it?" she asked. "Taking on a grieving widow and her failing ranch," Xavier laughed. "Not for a single moment. You were never just a grieving widow, Beatrice. You were always a force of nature. I just had the good sense to recognize it." "They all thought I was crazy," Beatrice remembered. "Wearing that coat, refusing to sell the ranch, insisting I could make it work." "You proved them all wrong," Xavier said. "Built something better than anyone imagined." "We built it," Beatrice corrected. "Together." "Together," Xavier agreed, taking her hand. As they sat there, watching their children and grandchildren play in the yard, Beatrice thought about the journey that had brought her here. The love she'd found and lost with Thomas. The grief that had nearly broken her. The coat that had been her armor and her comfort. And finally, Xavier, who'd seen past all of that to the woman she really was. She'd been mocked for wearing her dead husband's coat, but Xavier had seen her strength instead. And in seeing it, he'd helped her rediscover it herself. The coat hung in the closet now, worn but cherished, a reminder of both her past and her journey, but she didn't need to wear it anymore. She carried her strength within her, built from loss and love and the determination to keep living, keep building, keep growing. The ranch stretched out before them, thousands of acres of prime grazing land, herds of healthy cattle, fields of wheat and corn. Buildings stood sturdy and well-maintained. Ranch hands worked with purpose and pride. It was everything she and Thomas had dreamed of, achieved with Xavier by her side. Two different loves, two different chapters, but one continuous story of a woman who'd refused to be broken by loss and had instead been shaped into something stronger. "I love you," she said to Xavier, the words coming easily now after so many years. "I love you too," he replied. "Always have, always will." As the sun set over the South Dakota prairie, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Beatrice felt a deep sense of contentment. She'd been blessed twice in her life with love, and she'd had the courage to accept both blessings even when the world told her she shouldn't. The coat, Thomas's coat, had carried her through the hardest time of her life. But it was Xavier's love that had helped her learn to fly again. And in the end, that was what mattered most. Not what she'd lost, but what she'd found. Not what had been taken from her, but what she'd built in its place. A life full of love and purpose, surrounded by family, rooted in land she'd fought to keep, and shared with a man who'd seen her strength when everyone else had seen only her grief. The children were calling them for dinner now, Emma's voice rising above the others with its characteristic determination. Xavier stood, offering Beatrice his hand, and together they walked inside to join their family. Behind them, the prairie stretched endlessly under the darkening sky, and the ranch they'd built together stood solid and sure, a testament to love, resilience, and the courage to begin again. Years turned into decades. William married a schoolteacher from Hill City and gave them 4 grandchildren. Emma did study law, becoming one of the first female attorneys in South Dakota, defending women's property rights and becoming a fierce advocate for justice. Thomas took over the day-to-day operations of the ranch, proving himself a natural leader and innovator, introducing new breeding techniques and sustainable practices. Xavier and Beatrice grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. The house was full of children and grandchildren, noise and laughter and life. That evening, as things quieted down, Beatrice found herself in the bedroom, looking at the chest where Thomas's original coat still rested, alongside the new coat Xavier had made for her years ago. Both coats, old and new, past and present, integrated together just like her life had been. Emma found her there. "What are you thinking about, Mama?" "About journeys," Beatrice said. "About how we never know where life will take us. When your father's first father died, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd never be happy again, but I was wrong. Life kept going, and I had to choose whether to go with it or stay stuck in my grief." "The coat helped you choose," Emma said. She'd heard the stories many times. "The coat helped me feel strong enough to keep going," Beatrice agreed. "And your father helped me believe I deserved to be happy again. He saw past the grief to the person I really was." "He still sees you that way," Emma said softly. "The way he looks at you, even after all these years, like you're the most remarkable person he's ever known." "Because he makes me feel remarkable," Beatrice said. "That's the gift of real love. It doesn't diminish you or try to change you. It sees who you really are and says, yes, that's exactly who I want." Down the hall, she could hear Xavier talking with the grandchildren, telling them stories about the early days of the ranch. His voice was older now, a bit rougher, but still filled with warmth and humor. "Come on," Beatrice said to Emma. "Let's go join them. These moments don't last forever, and I want to savor every one." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Beatrice and Xavier sat on the porch one last time. The prairie was quiet, stars blazing overhead in the clear South Dakota sky. They'd sat here countless times over the years, and it never got old. "You remember the first time we sat here together?" Xavier asked. "When I rode out to check on you after the incident with Monroe. I remember thinking you were either very brave or very foolish to care about a widow everyone else had written off," Beatrice said. "I remember thinking you were the strongest person I'd ever met," Xavier replied. "And I was right. You still are. We did good, didn't we?" Beatrice asked, looking out at the ranch, at the life they'd built. "With the ranch, with the children, with everything, we did better than good," Xavier said. "We did amazing. And Beatrice, I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. Every moment, every challenge, every joy, all of it." even the part where you had to defend me to those cowboys, and deal with town gossip, and fight off Monroe, especially those parts, Xavier said, because those were the moments when I got to show you and everyone else how much I believed in you, how much I believed in us. Beatrice leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. "Thank you," she said, "for seeing me, for loving me, for building this life with me." "Thank you," Xavier replied, "for letting me." They sat there until the night grew late and cold, but neither wanted to move. These moments of peace and reflection were precious, reminders of how far they'd come and how much they'd built together. Finally, Xavier stood, offering Beatrice his hand just as he had thousands of times before. "Come on, my love," he said. "Let's go to bed. Tomorrow's going to be another busy day." "Tomorrow always is," Beatrice said, taking his hand and standing. "But that's what makes life worth living. Always another day, always another chance to do something meaningful." Inside, the house was warm and quiet. Their children and grandchildren slept peacefully in bedrooms throughout the house, a testament to the family they'd created. Beatrice paused at the chest, running her hand over the wood. "You ever miss him?" Xavier asked gently. "Thomas." "Sometimes," Beatrice admitted. "But not with the sharp pain it used to be. Now it's just a sweet sadness remembering what we had, and gratitude that I had it at all, even if it was shorter than I wanted." "He'd be proud of you," Xavier said, "of everything you've accomplished." "He'd be proud of us," Beatrice corrected. "Of what we built together, all three of us in a way, his dreams, your skill, my determination. It all went into creating this." That night, lying in bed with Xavier's arms around her, Beatrice felt complete. She'd lived long enough to see her children grown and thriving, long enough to know her grandchildren and watch them start to make their own marks on the world, long enough to build something lasting with the man who'd seen her strength when everyone else had seen only her grief. The coat, both versions of it, hung in the closet now, honored but no longer needed. She'd worn them when she needed armor, when she needed reminders of her own resilience. But she didn't need those reminders anymore. She knew who she was, what she was capable of, what she'd survived and thrived through. She was Beatrice Wright Anderson, widow and wife, rancher and mother, survivor and thriver. She'd been mocked for clinging to the past, but she'd used that past as a foundation to build an extraordinary future. And standing beside her every step of the way had been Xavier, the cowboy who'd looked past the coat and the grief and the widow's weeds to see the woman underneath. The woman who was strong enough to honor her past while embracing her future. The woman who'd refused to let loss define her, choosing instead to let love reshape her into something new and beautiful and enduring. As sleep claimed her, Beatrice smiled, surrounded by love, rooted in the land she'd fought to keep, secure in the knowledge that she'd lived a life worth living. A life built on the foundation of two great loves, both honored, both cherished, both woven into the fabric of who she was. The mocking voices of the past had long since faded, drowned out by the chorus of love and respect and family that filled her days. She'd worn her dead husband's coat, and one cowboy had seen her strength instead. And in seeing it, he'd helped her become more than she'd ever imagined possible. That was the real story, the one that mattered. Not the grief or the mockery or the struggles, but the love that had overcome all of it. The love that had built a ranch, raised a family, and created a legacy that would endure for generations. And as the prairie wind whispered around the house they'd built together, carrying with it the promise of tomorrow and all the tomorrows after that, Beatrice Wright Anderson slept peacefully, completely and wholly at peace with every choice she'd ever made, every path she'd walked, every love she'd embraced. The coat had been her armor, but love had been her salvation. And in the end, That made all the difference.